My daughter banned me from coming within 20 meters of my own grandchildren because I taught them to read. 14 days later, Child Protective Services stood on her front steps with clipboards, and that same afternoon she was on mine with a wet face, saying, "Mom, please." That's the whole arc in one breath. If you need more than a headline, sit with me. I'm the grandmother who broke my family to fix it. 20 meters. That was the border my daughter drew across our lives, as if love could be roped off and measured with a tape. By the week the inspectors stepped out of their gray sedan at the trailer park, I had paced that distance so many times the grass remembered my shoes. I wish I were exaggerating. But everything here is exactly as it happened. The alphabet in a mixing bowl, the fight that felt like a courtroom, the call I made with shaking hands, and the way we stitched ourselves back together with labels, pancakes, and a club of small readers who renamed our whole mess. I'm Ruth, 63, widow, retired school secretary, and the sort of grandmother who carries extra bandages, stickers, and raisins no one asks for, but everyone eats. I never imagined the first time I'd be told to stay away from children would be for something as harmless as sounding out syllables on soup cans. I've escorted crying kindergartners to the nurse, hunted lice, mediated playground politics, and sharpened more pencils than a lumber mill. In all those years, nobody accused me of pushing. What I push is doors open. It started on a Tuesday that pretended to be warm and wasn't. March sunlight made promises the wind refused to keep. I had the kids, Lena, 7, and Max, 5, because my daughter Tess works the morning shift at the diner and her partner, Reed, fixes whatever the mechanic hands him and hopes it's a car. They live at Lot 18 by the creek, where the ground never truly dries and the steps freeze faster than apologies. Their trailer is older than me in trailer years. Soft floors, a patchwork of duct tape where a rug ought to be, heaters that click nervously before they dare to glow. I brought a shoebox full of letters that day. Not books yet, just letters. Foam ones, magnet ones, cardboard ones I cut from cereal boxes while I watched a show where people renovate houses and call it a miracle when the sink drains properly. We dumped them in a mixing bowl and stirred with a wooden spoon as if we were making soup. "Chef Max," I announced, "today's special is alphabet stew." He fished up an M, his palms sticky with orange juice. He hummed, smiling like he'd invented the sound. I set an apple slice in front of him. "M for Max, M for Munch." He bit. The juice ran down his chin. He laughed. Lena, all elbows and long lashes, leaned over my shoulder, purposeful and curious, lips moving silently as she considered which letter would feel like magic next. We didn't cram. We didn't drill. We played. We spelled their names, then the dogs, then the word mud because there it was, tracking another line across the carpet. When we ran out of simple words, I slipped my hand into the bowl again and came out with hope. On the back of a grocery receipt, I wrote B. Then the word brave. Then a tiny sentence, "Be brave, Lena." She read it. On the third try, but still, she read it. Her eyes widened the way they did the first time. She learned she could ride her scooter farther than the corner mailbox. "That's mine?" she asked. "That sentence is mine?" "It is," I said. "You made it real." We were still grinning when the door banged open and March flung Tess inside, trailing a gust of cold air and burnt coffee. She had a smear of flour on her cheekbone and that tired look people wear when the world keeps asking for exact change. "You're doing it again," she said, "not even a hello." "We were just playing," I said. "Letters in a bowl." "Mom," she said, softer but more dangerous. "I've told you. They're kids. They want to play. They don't need school at home too. They don't need cramming." No one has ever accused me of cramming. I'm the sort of woman who refolds foil, saves glass jars so tulips have somewhere to sleep, and bakes banana bread with walnuts on one half because half my family thinks nuts are an invasion. But I've also spent 30 years watching children hide behind a smile that means I am lost and hoping an adult will notice the map is missing. "Tess," I said carefully. She just read her first sentence. "She feels proud. It's not about pushing. It's about power." Her jaw did a small, frightened tremble. "You mean the power I didn't get?" Because you had 2 jobs when I was little, and I came home to Uncle Benny's TV and mac and cheese? You mean that power? Guilt rose like a tide. No, I said, because guilt is honest, but not always helpful. I mean the kind that lets you read a bus schedule without asking for help. The kind that lets you decide for yourself. She snapped her apron string off and wadded it into a fist. Decide for myself? That's exactly what I'm doing. And I am their mother. I opened my palms. I know. Then hear me, she said, eyes shining now, but with anger, not tears. You don't get to come in here and undo the way we live just because you found your box of alphabet soup again. The rest unraveled faster than the old cardigan I was wearing. Reed came in from under the trailer with grease on his ear and a wrench balanced like a cigarette behind it. I tried to calm things and made it worse, tripping over words I didn't mean to say and swallowing the ones I did. In the end, Tess's voice went flat and official, a tone I'd only ever heard when she called a manager over to a table. This is simple, she said. From now on, you don't come near the kids. Not closer than the fence. 20 meters, you hear? That's what the park rule is for visitors anyway. 20 meters, or I call the police for trespassing. Because I taught them to read? I asked, stunned. Because you don't respect how I want to raise them, she answered, and walked down the hall to slam a door with a finality that made dishes tinkle in the sink. I left the shoebox on their table. Carried my own coat like it might bite me. Outside, the wind had the decency to go quiet while I went to my car. I measured the distance with my clumsy steps, counting like a child who doesn't trust math yet. 20 meters to the fence. 20 meters, and one more step to make sure. That night, sleep felt like a locked room. I boiled water for tea, then forgot the kettle until it shrieked. I took out the photo albums and found the one where Tess was 6, a gap in her smile, so wide you could park a truck. I remembered the kindergarten teacher who wrote Tess was social, imaginative, slightly behind in decoding, and the principal who called it no big deal. And then the day Tess began to avoid reading altogether, because no one likes to practice in a room where everyone else is 10 pages ahead. When she was 9, I found a crumpled book report in her backpack with a grade she wouldn't show me. It's boring, she said of the book. But she loved stories. She loved listening to me tell about my mother's garden and the stray cat who chose us like a prize. What she didn't love were the letters that made her feel like she was constantly late to her own life. I was 28, working 2 jobs, trying to outrun rent. I didn't sit beside her every night the way I wish I had. I told myself she'd catch up. She did, in the way people catch up by memorizing how others move. Maybe that's why the bowl of letters makes me fierce. Maybe that's why a sentence on a receipt felt like a rescue. 2 days after the fight, it snowed. In March, which is a cruel habit this state can't quit. It was the thin, mean kind of snow that melts as it hits asphalt and turns the world into a slip. I drove by with a bag of oranges and a pack of socks because fresh socks heal more than anyone admits. I parked beside the storm drain and counted out my 20 meters. The trailer's front steps glistened, more ice than paint. The space heater's orange glow pulsed in the window like a tired heart. Then I saw the children's breath fogging the pane. Not 2 little faces peeking out the way kids do at the promise of a visitor. Just breath, quick and white, 2 near the glass. I knocked on my hood with my keys so they'd see me, but the trailer stayed still. I called Tess. It went to voicemail. I called Reed. It rang and then gave up. Eventually, I convinced myself I was exaggerating. I went home and scrubbed the bathroom grout because that's what anxious women do when they can't fix what needs fixing. I told myself no one had ever been harmed by a morning of cartoons. I told myself to wait. At noon, my neighbor Marisol called. Her window faces the trailer park, and she has a voice that could cross a river even on a windy day. "Ruth," she said, "you need to drive back. Now." "Why?" "The little one's outside in socks," she said. "He's trying to pee off the porch because the toilet's backed up again." The bowl of letters on Tess's table flashed in my mind. The heaters that sometimes clicked and never quite breath steady unless you watched them. The gap between wanting a life where kids just play and the life that requires you to read warning labels. The 20-meter line I had promised to honor. I didn't cross it. I called. The woman on the hotline sounded like every tough angel I've ever met. Calm, specific, efficient. She didn't say things like, "Well, we all make choices." She said, "Tell me exactly what you saw and what you know." She asked about heat, about food, about supervision, about whether there was a working smoke detector, about that creek behind Lot 18 where a child could slip in faster than a curse. She didn't promise sirens. She promised to send someone. I went back and parked farther down, so I didn't have to pretend I came for a casual drive. 20 meters from love is the cruelest distance I know. It's close enough to see your grandson's socks soak through, to see your granddaughter open the door for him, to see the space heater's cord snake under a throw rug where cords do not belong. Close enough to watch, not close enough to help. The sedan rolled up quiet. 2 workers climbed out, both in jackets that said family services, but faces that said, "We'd rather introduce ourselves as people." A woman named Anita, a man named Bo. They didn't look like villains. They looked like what they were, civil servants balancing the scales with hands that were always a little too full. I raised mine. "I'm the one who called," I said. "Are you family?" Anita asked. "Grandmother," I said, and my voice cracked on the last syllable like it had fallen through thin ice. "Thank you for calling," she said, in a tone that understood calling sometimes looks like betrayal from the front step. They knocked. They waited. They knocked again with that authority you only ever learn from doing this job 100 times. Tess opened the door in socks and pajama shorts, hair up, eyes swollen. She looked from them to the drive to the yard to where she knew, without looking, I would be. "Mom," she said, a warning and a wound wrapped into one syllable. Anita explained why they were there. She used words like welfare check, initial assessment, safety plan. Not removal. Not yet. No one used that word, though it hovered in the cold edges of the air. They went inside. I stayed where the grass knew my shoes. A dog from Lot 20 came over to sniff my coat and accept my apology for doing the right thing badly. The whole time I imagined what they were seeing. The soft spot in front of the couch where the floor sagged under last summer's leak, the greasy vent, the fly strips curling sadly where they used to catch something, the cabinet with an inch of flour and 4 boxes of mac and cheese and nothing else, the bucket beside the toilet, the plastic bins that held all the toys besides a mountain of unproud laundry. An hour later they stepped out with clipboards full, faces sober but not scorched. Tess came out last, her mouth a stiff line. Reed had arrived in the middle and stood with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders rounded like the weather was a conversation he couldn't win. Anita thanked them for their time. She described the safety plan in the even voice of someone who knows the importance of paper. Fix the heater cord and replace the throw rug. Unfreeze the steps or salt them. Arrange childcare during morning shifts. Address plumbing within 2 weeks with proof. Follow up in 10 days. She mentioned support, a voucher for the hardware store, a list of community workers, a referral for a sliding scale plumber. And, she added, gentle but firm, this is your formal warning. If it isn't improved by the reinspection, we'll have to discuss next steps that may include placement. That's not what we want. We want to help you make this home safer. Tess nodded, eyes brimming but dry. And your mother, Anita said, glancing toward me with a hum of compassion, wants to be part of that help. If you're willing to accept it. The moment Anita said it aloud, the line of 20 meters became ridiculous. Not legally binding. Emotionally vicious. Something my daughter had brandished because she couldn't control anything else. Tess inhaled so sharply winter went right into her. She started to say something defensive. Stopped. Looked down at Max, who had come out in a different pair of socks and a coat without a zipper because the zipper's teeth had finally given up. Fine, she said to the inspectors. I'll fix it. We'll fix it. They left. The dog from Lot 20 trotted after the sedan, as if it could learn a better trick. Reed disappeared under the trailer with a flashlight that flickered at the worst possible moments. Tess stood on the top step where the paint's last brave streaks clung and stared at nothing for a long minute. Then she looked at me. You called them, she said, flat, not quite accusing, not quite thinking. I stood very still so I wouldn't blur. I did, I said. Because I am terrified you're doing too much with too little, and because you told me to stand 20 meters away from caring. She made a sound half laugh, half sob. I hate asking for help. I know. I hate feeling outmatched by a form. You and me both, I said. But we can outmatch a list. She snorted softly, and for a terrible, beautiful second looked 19 again, full of stubborn light. You and your lists. Everyone who's ever crossed a river wrote them, I said. My list starts with groceries and ends with a plumber who owes me a favor because I taught his twins to hold a pencil without strangling it. We can't pay a plumber, Tess said. We'll figure out the money, I said, and meant it in a dozen small, honest ways. There are programs. There are work-for-work trades. There is my retirement account I promised I wouldn't touch and absolutely will. There is the library's repair cafe where retired men fix things to the glory of making sense again. She rubbed her eyes with her knuckles hard enough to leave the tender skin pink. Are you going to say, I told you so every time you leave a bag of groceries? No, I said. I'm going to show you the sales and label the shelves and put a pan under the leak and teach Max to hang socks on the rack so they dry by bedtime. I'm going to show you that reading isn't cramming. It's learning the instructions the world hides in plain sight. Her chin trembled. I thought if I said no to reading at home with you, I was protecting them from the shame I always felt. The lag. I didn't want them to see letters and think of struggling. I wanted them to play until life was kinder. Then say yes to reading that looks like play, I said. Yes to pretend store and menus we write with crayons. Yes to notes that say Max, feed the dog 2 scoops, and Lena, you're brave, and Mom, put the burner on medium. Yes to you standing with me while we ask someone to fix the toilet properly. That is also reading. She covered her face, then dropped her hands and looked at me like I was a light she'd forgotten how to turn on. Okay, she said. That afternoon, I drove to every place that had a bulletin board and a Hope, church office, library, community center. I pulled little tabs from flyers and left messages for plumbers who might barter and handy people who enjoyed a challenge. I stopped at the diner on Tess's break and slid a notebook across the table. On the first page I'd written, safety plan, then underlined it twice. Under that, Step 1, cord, Step 2, rug, Step 3, porch, Step 4, plumbing, Step 5, childcare. She read the headings silently, lips moving. It looks big, she said. Then we make it small, I said, and drew boxes beside each step so we could check them with a small thrill. We tackled the cord the same day. The voucher from Anita's office stretched farther than I expected when I smiled at the hardware clerk like someone's favorite aunt. I bought a cord heavy enough to run a small planet, new outlet covers, salt for the steps, and one of those door sweeps to keep drafts from making a home. Reed installed the cord while I held the flashlight as if my light were the most important thing. The rug came up to reveal a square floor that sighed when you stepped on it, the kind of sigh that tells a story about rain and neglect. Reed measured, cut, and set a patch like a dentist filling an honest cavity. We called it temporary. We meant it. The porch got a spine. Reed and the park manager, who had avoided eye contact with us for years, stood shoulder to shoulder, arguing cheerfully about screws versus nails like two old friends who disguise kindness as opinions. The manager brought coarse salt and a new railing because Anita had left a message with words like documentation and compliance. Suddenly, he was a man who appreciated safety. He even found a motion light in a shed and installed it while pretending he had always intended to. Plumbing took a weekend and a favor. The plumber I knew from the school carnival came on a Saturday because he likes to listen to soccer on the radio while he works. The toilet coughed and then sighed. The bucket retired to the shed with honors. Childcare was the hardest line on the list, not because the kids were difficult, but because time is a beast no one can tame. I volunteered for mornings, Tuesdays and Thursdays without fail, and whenever else I could. Marisol took Wednesdays because she loves Max's serious questions and has a grandson his age who treats her house like a second castle. We posted a note on the community board, and two teenage sisters offered to cover an occasional Friday for grocery money and hot chocolate. Inside, we worked the kind of magic that looks like ordinary order. We labeled shelves with Max's blocky printing: bowls, cups, rice. We put the heavy pots on the low shelf so no one had to play Jenga with cookware. We taped index cards around the trailer until it looked like a quiet festival: door, stove, sink, hope. Lena decorated each card with a tiny drawing. The stove got flames shaped like hearts. The sink got bubbles. Hope got a star and a question mark because hope isn't a guarantee so much as a plan. At night, when the kids slept, Tess sat with me at the table and practiced reading recipes we chose together. Pancakes, chili, baked chicken, a soup that looked like it would fix most aches. Mince, she'd read, squinting. That's small, right? Small, I said. Very small, like the pieces of worry we can swallow. She smiled at that. Mom, she said once, you're corny. I'm aged, I said, like a good cheddar. Stop, she said, laughing despite herself, and circled the word simmer as if naming it would keep the pot from boiling over. In those 2 weeks, I met more neighbors than I had in the last 2 years. A man named Oliver fixed the wobbly table leg with a carpenter's wink. A nurse on night shift dropped off a box of kid socks and a bag of clementines because she said fresh fruit is the best bribe. A grandmother with a voice like gravel taught me how to stitch a rip in a coat so the mend would outlast the fabric. And still, sometimes at midnight, I'd sit up in bed and feel the old panic climb my spine. What if the reinspection found us lacking? What if the line I crossed, calling, was the one Tess never forgave? I'd picture that tidy gray sedan and the gentle, official way Anita said words like placement and follow-up. I'd picture a future where my grandchildren read in another kitchen at another table without the letters we taped to the wall. Then I'd get up, make tea, and write a note for the morning. Lena, library at 4. Max, 2 scoops for the dog. Tess, call the office about housing waitlist. It's amazing what a list can do for a person awake at 2 a.m. The reinspection day smelled like thawing mud and second chances. Lena was at the table with a sheet of paper that said to Inspector Anita in shaky, earnest letters. She had drawn a house with a straight floor and a smiling toilet and hearts where the heater cords used to be. Max sat with a bowl full of letters again, and this time he pulled out a tea and shouted, "Tea for Tess," like an announcement at a parade. Tess, who had scowled the first 10 times he did it, smiled on the 11th. Anita and Bo stepped in and tapped each card with a pen like they were checking a magic ward. They checked the steps, the rails, the cord, the bathroom, the pantry. Anita looked over her clipboard and nodded, not at the plywood or the salt but at the posture in the room. Shoulders higher now, eyes calmer. She explained the follow-up schedule and the resources that become available after a successful safety plan. It was, she said carefully, an excellent improvement. Will there be any more warnings? Tess asked, voice smaller than she meant it to be. There will be visits, Anita said. There will be support. There will be expectations. But you did what we asked. You did it well. Keep going. She paused. And it's okay to accept help. That's a skill too. After they left, Tess sank onto the tiny couch and pressed her palms to her eyes until her breath went steady again. When she uncovered her face, her cheeks were wet but not destroyed. She said, I was afraid you were punishing me. I was afraid you would never forgive me, I said. Maybe we get to be afraid and still do the right thing, she said, and laughed, surprised by her own sentence like it had built itself from a bowl of letters. That night she came to my house. I was in my kitchen with the kettle and a loaf of bread barely holding itself together because I cut warm bread like I cut my hair, badly, but with enthusiasm. I opened the door and she was there, hair in a ponytail, coat open, eyes red again for a different reason. I'm sorry, she said, and the words landed on my doorstep like a warm coat. I'm sorry about the 20 meters. I'm sorry I made you choose between being a grandmother and being a coward. I'm sorry. I thought you were trying to make me into you. I reached for her, but she raised one finger. And, she said, chin lifting, I'm not nothing. I can do hard things. I did them. Reed did them. We're doing them still. I need you to see that, not just see what's broken. I need you to teach me what you taught Lena. That power isn't about who reads fast. It's about who keeps reading when the words get mean. I nodded until I got dizzy. You are not nothing, I said. You are the person who stayed up with Max when the cough got nasty because the clinic was closed and you had peppermint oil and patience. You are the person who went to the school meeting even when paperwork makes you feel like you're being tested. You're the person who told me with your whole chest that kids deserve to play.
You are not me.
Thank goodness we get to be two women and still be a family. We cried in that way where you barely make a sound, and yet the tears go all the way through you. We ate bread too soon. We burned our tongues on tea. We made a plan on the back of a napkin like teenagers. Sundays at the library's family hour. Thursdays I take the kids while she takes a nap or a shower that lasts as long as a song. Every morning, one chore for Max, one sentence for Lena. We put on the calendar in blue pen. Housing office open 9 to 11, ask about waitlist. We texted Reed. The railing past inspection like it had just graduated. But the part that stays with me isn't the logistics. It's the morning 3 weeks later, when Lena came over while her mother filled out forms at the housing office. She walked into my kitchen like she owned a small nation and held up a folded paper, a handwritten invitation for a reading club she started at the park. The first meeting would be on the rectangle of dead grass where toddlers throw tantrums and grown men fix bikes. She had a list of children she'd invited, some with names I'd watched fly by on scooters for years and never learned. She had asked the library for a crate of beginner readers, and the librarian had said yes because librarians are often the soft landing for wild ideas. I called it the 20-meter club, she said, with the grace of a queen who knows her crown is heavy and wears it anyway. Because that's how far love had to stretch for a minute. I've already told you I'm a crier. But that day I laughed first, laughed at the audacity of a child who takes a wound and makes it into a banner. The club met at noon on a Saturday, and kids came with muddy shoes and appetites I hadn't planned for. I sliced apples and crackers and peanut butter to stand as compensation for running. Max sat cross-legged and tried to keep the letters in the bowl from escaping. Reed made a second bench from a pallet he found by the dumpsters and didn't get a splinter because I had a pocket knife and the stubbornness of a woman who wants children to sit without fear. Tess stood with a clipboard of attendance not because she had to, but because sometimes the person who once couldn't bear paperwork becomes the person who counts things that matter. The park manager watched from his truck for a while. Then he got out and asked if he could move the trash can closer, and if we needed cones so the smaller kids wouldn't wander into parking lanes. He wasn't a villain either. He was a man who'd been taught to see complaints as threats until the day someone invited him to a picnic. Lena led the meeting with the confidence of a child who is poorly acquainted with doubt. She read aloud a book about a dog who wants to be a firefighter, which is a very silly premise unless you are 7, and then it is law. The word brave came up so often it felt like a drum under the whole afternoon. At the end, she handed out strips of paper. I expected bookmarks. They were contracts. I /blank promise to help someone else read a word when they ask. I promise not to laugh when they are learning. I promise to teach someone one thing I know how to do, even if it is not reading. We all signed, even the parents, even the manager, who signed with a tiny flourish and looked embarrassed afterward as if kindness might get him in trouble. If you want the moment where the world shifted, not from callousness to compassion, that's a long road, but from heat to warmth, it was when Tess took a strip for herself. She printed her name slowly, carefully, Tess, then looked at me and said, I think I'll start with how to make pancakes without burning them. Max, Lena whispered, conspiratorial, you can teach the dog to sit. Dog can't read, Max said, scandalized. She can read your face, I said. That counts. The call to family services didn't peel the roof off our lives. It raised it an inch, so we could breathe. It put us on a list for a slightly better lot across the park where the ground holds its own garden, where the light finds the kitchen table like it used to find me and your grandpa, Charlie, every morning we didn't deserve. It connected Tess to a tutor who works with adults on reading without shame because apparently everyone deserves someone to map the jungle with them.
She goes Tuesday nights.
She does not tell anyone from work. She does not need to. Every family has a story that breaks it and a story that mends it. Ours ended up being the same one, told two ways. There was the version where I called strangers and held my breath while they judged my child. And there was the version where I made the hardest phone call of my life and then stood by the porch with a toolbox, a coupon book, and absolutely no smugness, ready to do the next right thing. Things kept happening the way life insists. A windstorm lifted a patch of the trailer roof like a stubborn lid, and for 2 days we lived with bowls on the floor and towels on the couch. Reed and Oliver sealed it with a kit and their combined caution. The park's notice board sprouted a flyer for our club and Lena's careful script. Next to it, someone advertised piano lessons for $10 and the use of a keyboard that had only one key sticky with jam. The diner cut Tess's hours and then added them back because the new hire quit. She and I learned how to read schedules that come at midnight like a riddle. There were stumbles. Tess and I had smaller fights now, the kind with softer edges. One Tuesday, I arrived with a stack of activity pages, mazes, letter hunts, a comic you fill in yourself. Tess glanced and said, "Too much." I bristled. "It's fun." She drew a breath, tried again. "Too much for me today." I put half the stack back in my bag, and we compromised with a game that involved fridge magnets and a fishing line. I learned to ask, "Do you want this?" and mean it. She learned that I would still love her if she said no. At school, Lena's teacher sent a note. Not the kind that makes your heart do a bad drum solo, the other kind. Lena had raised her hand during quiet reading time to help a classmate with a word and had done it kindly, the teacher wrote, with no giggling. She had started turning in tiny essays about the dog and the creek and the way salt makes ice go away. Sometimes she spelled creek like creek, which felt correct to all of us. Max, meanwhile, became a foreman of small tasks. He liked lists he could cross off in dramatic pencil. Feed dog. Put spoon in sink. Match socks. He would announce, "I did a chore," like a town crier, and then run circles until the dog had to lie down from the joy of it. Tess kept going to tutoring. The first time she came home with a library book meant for adults, I saw her lean on the counter and read a paragraph twice, then a third time, and then her mouth shaped the word nevertheless, and she smiled to herself like a private triumph. Later she told me, in an almost whisper, "I thought that word belonged to movie lawyers." "It belongs to you," I said. "It belongs to anyone who needs it." "You make everything sound simple," she said. "Simple isn't easy," I said. "It's just clear." Spring nosed in and pretended not to be shy. The club spread like dandelions, unavoidable, bright, accused by some of being weeds and by others of being wishes. We added stations. The make-a-menu table, where kids wrote pretend specials and practiced prices. The label the park scavenger hunt, where we stuck cards to things that don't usually get names. Bench, bin, bird bath. The quiet corner for anyone who needed to sit with a book and a dog for a while. The dog, who could read our faces, became the most literate creature among us. We invited the adults to a night version of the club. No tests. Tess insisted on the flyer. No shame. Soup provided. People came. A mechanic learned to spell warranty without wanting to throw the pen. A mother wrote a note to her child's teacher and read it aloud to a small cheer. The manager hovered and then sat and learned how to fill out an online form with someone sitting patiently beside him. At the diner, Tess began to volunteer to read the new menu items out loud at staff meetings. The first time, her voice trembled, but her hand didn't. "Cinnamon apple pancakes," she read, and then looked up at me where I sat in a booth with coffee and pride, and she smiled a shape I hadn't seen since she was 6. There were tests, real ones, and the other kind. Family services showed up for an unannounced visit once, which is their right. Anita wasn't there. Another worker came, younger, with a ponytail too tight, and a way of looking around that read as suspicion even if it was only training. We walked through the list again, and this time the worker pointed to the stove and asked about the burner. "Medium," Tess said, like a password. She lifted the pan with a cloth the dog had been sleeping on, and the worker smiled despite herself. Another time, the school sent home a form that made Tess panic because it asked for an accommodation she didn't know if Lena needed. We sat at the table with tea and turned the form into pieces. Question by question. What does this mean? What do you see at home? What does Lena say? Tess wrote in steady letters, I want my child to be helped without being hurt. The next day, the teacher called and said, thank you for this note, and I watched Tess stand taller because a sentence she wrote moved a small mountain. Not everyone applauded. A woman from Lot 7 muttered, some people think they're better than the rest of us now that inspectors know their name. Tess heard. Her face went carefully blank the way faces go when they are trying not to be cut. That night at club, the woman's grandson came without a parent and sat on the quiet corner rug and traced the word brave with one finger until the paper got soft. Tess put an apple slice beside him and asked if he wanted to make a menu for a pancake shop.
He did.
The next week the woman from Lot 7 brought a bag of flour and said, for your club, like a dare and a truce. There were costs. My retirement account acquired a little bruise where I touched it to pay the electrician who said, kindly, that even heavy cords deserve proper outlets. I bought shoes for Lena that didn't pretend to have arch support, and a coat for Max that zipped with a sound so satisfying we clapped. I say this not to polish my halo. Believe me, it's dinged, but to tell the truth, help often costs. And it gives back in currency no bank recognizes. One night in June, heat sat like a cat on the roof. We ate popsicles and let them drip into the grass. Lena read aloud a chapter book with no pictures and more feelings than plot, and Max fell asleep on Reed's knee like a soft bell. When the porch light clicked on, I realized I had been sitting there for nearly an hour without once measuring the distance between the curb and the steps. My body had retired the habit. Still, the story doesn't end neatly. I promise no miracles here. There was the afternoon Tess missed tutoring because the bus didn't come and her phone died, and she walked home angry at the sky. There was the day the park sent a rent increase notice, and the paper shook in her hand. There was the morning Lena came home crying because someone said the 20-meter club was for babies who can't read. She threw the word baby like a stone against the refrigerator and then apologized to the refrigerator. We handled each in the way we had learned, with a list, with a phone call, with soup, with a nap, with the stubborn return to the next right thing. Reed took an extra shift and then fell asleep with his boots on, and I took them off for him the way I used to for Charlie after he worked the night he shouldn't have. Tess called the tutoring program and explained the bus and the phone, and they said, come in tomorrow. The chair will still be warm. Lena brought the child who had said baby to the club and put an apple slice in his hand like a treaty. He ate it, as all treaties should be eaten. Midsummer, the housing office called. A spot had opened in a different row, a trailer with fewer soft spots and a small rectangle of dirt that could be a garden if someone spoke to it kindly. We moved in a day with 3 borrowed trucks, 6 teenagers who wanted pizza, and a woman named Jan who wrapped dishes with the efficiency of a person who has moved too often. The new place had a window that faced east, so the morning found us, without having to be invited. I screwed a whiteboard into the wall crooked again. On it we wrote, pancakes, 10 a.m. club, 12. Library, 4. The old whiteboard came too, and Tess leaned it against the counter, because it had memories she didn't want to erase. On the first morning in the new kitchen, Tess flipped pancakes so thin I worried they'd turn invisible. She stuck her tongue out a little when she concentrated the way she had at 8 when she drew horses with legs like question marks. They're not burning, she said, triumphant. No, I said. They are golden. Lena burst in with a folder clutched to her chest. I got moved up, she announced, to the group that reads chapter books without pictures. Tess cheered until Max shushed her, hand over her mouth, because he had come to believe his opinion about volume matters, and sometimes he is right. Sorry, Tess said into his palm, grinning.
She turned to me.
I said yes to something, she whispered, as if the word might run away if she spoke too loudly. I signed up to help in the classroom every other Friday so I can see how they teach reading now. It's different than I remember. It's kinder. I tucked a stray hair behind her ear. You are different than I remember, I said. You're kinder to yourself. She picked up a marker and wrote on the whiteboard. Pancakes, 10. Inspection, never again. Library, 4. She paused and then, in a space near the bottom, wrote 20 meters and drew a line. Then she scribbled it out, the way we cross out bad rules when we finally own the pen. The 20-meter club held a summer festival with used books, lemonade strong enough to argue, and a reading stage that was really two palettes on their side. Kids read jokes and poems, and a recipe aloud like a performance art. Reed emceed with a surprising ease, calling up our smallest giant, Max, and the mighty reader, Janelle, and the park's poet laureate, which means she rhymes on purpose. The manager brought trash bags and stayed to hear 3 chapters of a book about a dragon who loves broccoli. Near the end, Tess stood on the pallets with a paper that looked like it had been folded and unfolded all morning. She read a paragraph from an article about free summer meals at the school and then said, voice only shaking a little, "There are things you think are not for you, but sometimes they are. And sometimes you get to say yes first and be scared later." Our neighbors clapped. Marisol whistled. A boy in a Spider-Man shirt yelled, "Go, Miss Tess," like a sports fan. I cried in public, which at this point was my brand. Fall brought school forms, bus schedules, and the settling of routines. The club moved indoors to the community room where the air conditioner rattled like an old friend. We added a coat rack and a crate of mittens that didn't match but did the job. Tess began keeping a notebook of sentences I want, which is what she called phrases that felt useful. As discussed, next steps, I appreciate your help. Nevertheless. She used them in emails to the school and text to her boss, and once, magnificently, in a note to the park manager that got a pothole filled within the hour. On a Tuesday in October, Family Services closed our case with a letter that said, in the gray language of offices, that we had met the requirements of the safety plan and were now in the category called monitored self-sufficiency. We stood in the kitchen and stared at the phrase like art you aren't sure you like, and then decide you love. "I don't ever want to be in a file again," Tess said, only half joking. "You'll always be in mine," I said, touching my chest. "But it's not a file. It's a story." She rolled her eyes and hugged me anyway. There are days I think about the alternative story. The one where I obeyed the 20 meters so strictly that I let my fear do the parenting. The one where the cord stayed frayed, the steps stayed slick, the bucket stayed by the toilet, and my daughter stayed proud and alone. That story exists for someone. It doesn't for us. I made a call I wish I didn't have to make, and then showed up with my whole unglamorous body to do the work.
Tess met me there.
Reed met us there. The kids kept being kids, which is to say resilient and ridiculous and holy. A year on, a poster hangs by Tess's door. It's something Lena made with glitter glue and resolve. It says, 20 meters, the distance love can cross, the rule we don't need anymore. Underneath she drew a line with dots that look suspiciously like pancakes. At the bottom, in a slanting, stubborn hand that will always be hers, Tess wrote a sentence. "Be brave, Tess." She read it once, twice, then out loud. She tucked the marker behind her ear. She crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled me into a hug that didn't measure anything except relief. "I thought your bowl of letters would drown us in expectations," she whispered into my shoulder. "But it gave us a boat. If you're waiting for the part where I say, everything is perfect now, wait longer. What we are is better than before. We are still poor on paperwork and rich in casseroles. We keep salt by the door and books on the windowsill. We do not mock mistakes. We do not make rules we can't keep. We bring 2 pairs of socks for every child who forgets. We ask for help. We keep reading. And on afternoons when the sun lies about being warm, I still find myself counting the steps from the curb to the porch, out of habit and a superstitious hope that I'll never be asked to stop there again. I get to keep going now. Up the steps, through the door, into that everyday magic that makes a life. I hang my coat. I wash my hands. I pull a letter from a bowl. I look at my daughter and my grandchildren and the quiet, steady home we built out of the loud, messy one we were given. I put the letter down on the table like a blessing.
B.
Afterward you didn't ask for but might need. If you have your own 20 meters, the kind drawn in pain and stubbornness, here is my unscientific advice. Make a list so small it's almost funny. Do one thing, then another. Ask a neighbor for a name. Ask a library for help. Ask an office for a person, not a promise. Feed people who come to help if you can, and let them feed you if you can't. Tape the words you want to live by on the wall where everybody can see them. Cross out the rules that never should have been written. And when you can't think of anything else, pick up a letter from the bowl and make a word that feels like a door. Begin.
So another story of my grandmother has end, and be clicking here you will have when more such stories.